U.S. officials are increasingly concerned about the deepening relations between the two countries and what it could mean for Ukraine as North Korea continues to provide weapons and munitions to Russia as their stockpiles dwindle. For more on those meetings in North Korea today, NBC News international correspondent Janis Mackey Frayer filed this report.
Russian President Vladimir Putin got a warm red carpet welcome from Kim Jong-un. There was even a moment of awkward debate over who would be first to get into Kim's luxury car, which incidentally was a gift from Putin. Throughout the state visit, the two remained side by side, projecting unity as they walked past soldiers, horses, groups of children. After 2 hours of talks, they signed a strategic defense treaty that provides mutual assistance in case of aggression against either of the two countries. Putin said the agreement lifts their ties to a new level as they're both looking to strengthen their partnership in the face of sanctions from the West. Kim pronounced North Korea's unwavering support for Russia in the war with Ukraine, and Putin thanked him for that. The question is, what comes next? North Korea has been accused of providing Russia with ammunition and missiles, and the worry is that more deliveries will follow this visit. Moscow, in return, can provide food, energy, and other aid, as well as the sort of technology that could help North Korea boost its missile and nuclear programs. All of this is raising alarms for the U.S. and the West, because this strengthened alliance is not only fueling the war in Ukraine, but instability on the Korean Peninsula. The State Department has already said that North Korea has shipped 11,000 containers of munitions in recent months to aid Russia's war effort. And this visit and all its fanfare will do little to ease those concerns.
That was Janis Mackey Frayer in Beijing. And I'm joined now by NBC News White House correspondent Monica Alba and NBC News international correspondent Matt Bradley in Jerusalem. Thank you both so much for joining me. Monica, let's start in North Korea. How is the administration reacting to this new defense pact?
Well, Gabe, they say that they have really been warning about this deepening cooperation between North Korea and Russia for some time. So they're really casting this as not surprising, but all the while concerning. And they're really saying and emphasizing that, of course, the U.S. will continue to support Ukraine and allies in the Indo-Pacific in the face of this. And they really are saying that it shouldn't necessarily be underestimated, that this is something, of course, that people should take seriously, but it's something that the White House has really been keeping an eye on. And they always like to really put this in the larger concept and context of look at who President Putin's allies are, look at who Kim Jong-un's allies are, and then look at the rest of the world and view this as they are isolated in what they can do together versus the way larger international community putting pressure on Russia to end its war in Ukraine. Gabe.
Yeah, Monica, picking up on that point, the U.S. already has a slew of sanctions on Russia and North Korea. As you said, both countries increasingly isolated on the world stage. So is there anything the administration can really do to try and stop this partnership from growing?
And we've seen in the past that sanctions also may not always be as effective as they are in their messaging for what the U.S. and the Biden administration would like to convey. But nonetheless, the administration will continue to evaluate and says that they could be coming down with further sanctions, and they're always looking to those things. But this is really about just trying to present these very, very differing worldviews and also trying to raise this larger question and idea that they say that President Biden, during his term in office so far, has tried to restore some stability to the world stage. And they always put this in the context of what could happen if he loses re-election and if former President Trump, who has had at times sympathetic words for both President Putin and for Kim Jong-un at times, what that could mean for that. And they like to, they say, remind Americans of the stakes of that. So they bring that back into the fold as well. But that will simply be determined by the voters in November, Gabe.
Yeah, and Monica, let's turn to Israel, where once again we're seeing this rift, right, between the White House and Prime Minister Netanyahu. It looks like the White House, at least publicly, it says it was caught off guard by this video statement from the Prime Minister yesterday. What do we know about this meeting that was reportedly canceled?
Yeah, and it's rare to have the White House say literally bottom line, we have no idea what the Prime Minister of Israel is talking about, and saying that there was no such meeting scheduled. There are normal communications and conversations between Israeli and U.S. officials throughout the course of this week and almost every single week, obviously, since the war began and since October 7th. So the White House is saying that there are always these sort of back-channel communications. That shouldn't be surprising, but it's not like there was some major meeting that now needs to be rescheduled. And the fact that really you had Secretary Blinken very clear in his messaging when he came back from that recent trip, putting this in the context of saying, yes, there was one shipment of weapons that was put on hold when President Biden had talked about this larger potential shift in policy and threats to withhold military aid, but that there hadn't been anything since then. The U.S. has been very clear on that, saying that they don't know what Prime Minister Netanyahu is referring to when he's trying to imply in those comments that there were more, or that there has been other halting of shipments or aid or weapons that Israel is asking for. It really just speaks to how fraught this relationship is at a really critical point in the war, where we just don't know also what the true status is of the hostage talks and potential ceasefire deal. Gabe.
And Matt, I want to turn to you on the ground in Jerusalem. What are Israeli officials saying about these tensions between the two leaders? Now that the war cabinet has been dissolved, with moderates like Benny Gantz no longer advising the prime minister, could we see even more tension between President Biden and the prime minister?
Yeah, I mean, when you're talking about the tensions and the fraught relationship that my colleague Monica was just saying, that's been going on for months. And actually, we rarely see these really obvious sightings of it. Things like the broadside that was fired by Benjamin Netanyahu in that video, and that response by the White House saying they had no idea what he was talking about. These are the kinds of words you don't hear between close allies. And what we're seeing now is sort of a relationship that is under a lot of strain, a lot of stress. But so is Benjamin Netanyahu. He's facing his own pressures from within his own camp. He has one of the most right-wing governments in Israel's history. He has to answer now, as you mentioned, mostly to his right flank. Now that Benny Gantz, considered a moderate, has resigned from the war cabinet and pulled out of the government, or his party has, that means that it's kind of the right wing that's left to their own devices. And these people are quite aggressive when it comes to the fighting in the Gaza Strip. They are hawks in the truest sense of the word. And so, that might cause more tension with Washington. Benjamin Netanyahu has to parry from both sides in his, dealings with all of these different factions within the government. But now he doesn't have to do that as much. He's going to be dragged even further to the right. And that could be a problem, particularly when it comes to these negotiations, that the U.S. government, particularly Secretary of State Antony Blinken, has made a pet project. He's been to the region 8 times trying to negotiate this. So, this is going to be complicated and further politically ostracizing for both Washington and for Netanyahu and his right-wing ministers.
And Matt, the UN is out with another report today saying that Israel may have violated the laws of war in Gaza. What else is in that report, and what's the latest on the ground in the Gaza Strip?
Well, what we're seeing in the Gaza Strip is still this continuing fighting, particularly in the southern part in Rafah. We were seeing some strikes against the Nusayrat refugee camp, which have been going on actually for the past couple of weeks. We had that huge operation that killed more than 270 Palestinians, according to the Gazan health authorities, when they were trying to free and successfully freed those 4 Israeli hostages. Now, there has been a lot of these sorts of accusations by the United Nations and other international groups accusing both Israel and Hamas of having committed war crimes. And one of the big issues we keep hearing over and over again is one of proportionality. And, that episode in freeing those 4 hostages, that is something that really speaks to that proportionality issue. But also, we've heard from Israeli government officials saying how distasteful it is not just to have these accusations levied against them, but in so many cases to be lumped with Hamas. They don't want to be they don't want to have a moral equivalency with Hamas, and that's what we keep seeing from the ICJ and the ICC, these sorts of rulings where we're starting to see a lot of sort of, moral equivalency, and that's very angering to a lot of Israeli officials.
Matt Bradley, live for us in Jerusalem. Monica Alba outside the White House. Thank you both so much.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app, or follow us on social media.